Born in 1769 on the island of Corsica, Napoleon Bonaparte emerged from a land steeped in Italian heritage and turbulent history. Corsica was long under Genoese rule, but they constantly rose up. Led by Pasquale Paoli, the Corsican Republic maintained power from 1755 to 1769 when it was conquered by the French as Corsica sold their claims to the island. The sale subjected Corsica to French governance, yet its Italian cultural roots, tied to the language and traditions of nearby Tuscany, profoundly shaped Napoleon's identity. His family, the Bonapartes, claimed noble Tuscan ancestry, fostering his lifelong admiration for Italian culture. Trained at French military schools, Napoleon embraced the French ideals while distancing his ties to Corsica, dropping the U from Bonaparte to sound more French. Once the Revolutionary Wars broke out, he distinguished himself in the 1793 Siege of Toulon, the 1796 to 1797 Italian campaign, defeating Austrian and Italian forces, established the Cisalpine Republic and cemented his reputation as France's rising star. By 1799, he seized power as first consul, and in 1804 crowned himself Emperor of the French, consolidating France's dominance across Europe. His military genius shone, but his ambition led to overreach. The Peninsular War and invasion of Russia cost millions of lives, destroying his unblemished reputation. Defeated at Leipzig in 1813, Napoleon was exiled first to Elba, only to return for 100 days, before the irrevocable Battle of Waterloo. Following the defeat, he was sent to St. Helena, where he died in 1821. But don't get down, there were 50,000 Bonapartists and the 90% who have yet to subscribe. History was forever changed in 1791 as young Napoleon Bonaparte returned to his native Corsica, a land still reeling from France's Iron Fist occupation. The island's culture, language, and pride had been trampled, then Corsican nationalists, led by the fiery Pasquale Paoli, viewed the Bonaparte family as traitors for their ties to the French. Before we continue, please take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already done so. The channel is currently unsustainable, so I don't know how much longer I can keep these going. Subscribing does help a lot. You can also support me through Patreon to get the maps and other stuff from the videos. Thanks. Historically, Napoleon brushed off their scorn when he returned to the island, embracing the revolutionary cause and rising through France's ranks. But here, the rejection stung deeper, igniting a fire in the ambitious Corsican. Napoleon turned his gaze to the heroes of Italy's past: Scipio Africanus, Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar, Niccolò Machiavelli, Francesco Sforza, Lorenzo the Magnificent, alongside many others, with the dream of completing the mission: unify Italia free from foreign yokes. By 1797, Napoleon's brilliance on the battlefield had carved out a string of victories across northern Italy, humbling the Austrians and their allies. Instead of molding the Cisalpine Republic as a French puppet, which served as a stepping stone for his rise as first consul, here the French Directory, unnerved by his soaring popularity, sought to clip his wings. Following the Treaty of Campo Formio, which handed Venice to Austria and birthed the Cisalpine Republic, they appointed Napoleon as its director, a gilded exile, they thought, to keep him far from the power games in Paris. Yet, the Directory had miscalculated. Napoleon saw not a cage, but a canvas. Free from Parisian meddling, he poured his revolutionary zeal into transforming the Republic into a sovereign beacon of Italian unity. Drawing on the principles that would later birth the Napoleonic Code, liberté, égalité, and fraternité, he began crafting a state that answered to Italians, not the French overlords. Feudal privileges were stripped, while public works in Milan and Bologna with sanitation systems were constructed. His deft touch extended to the church. Learning from the Papal States' backlash against France's anti-clerical fervor, he preserved Catholic traditions, winning over priests and peasants alike. To defend his vision, the Army of the Po, a disciplined force of 30,000 Italians trained in the lightning-fast tactics that had crushed Austrians at Lodi and Arcole, was organized. The French Directory, ever suspicious of Napoleon's meteoric rise and Corsican roots, sought to tighten their grip on Italy. But Napoleon outmaneuvered both Paris and Vienna. In January 1798, he launched a daring offensive, exploiting the disunity of Italy's patchwork states. The army of Ticino, under the fearless French general Louis-Charles-Antoine Doucet, whose valor had shown at Lauterburg and Kehl, surged across the Po River, capturing Turin in a whirlwind campaign. The House of Savoy, weakened by years of French meddling, fled to Sardinia, their defenses shattered by Doucet's relentless maneuvers as their lands were carved between Napoleon and Doucet. Napoleon then turned south, leading the army of the Po into the Papal States, entering Rome in February. Unlike his historical plunder of Rome's treasures, he refused to strip its cultural heritage, earning the admiration of a people long exploited by foreign powers. Thus, he spread propaganda comparing his treatment of the Italians to the Habsburgs' continual rapes of their precious peninsula. Sparing the Vatican's treasures, he allowed Pope Pius VII to remain, seizing only some wealth to fund his republic, but winning cautious support from a populist weary of revolution, but stirred by his call for unity. In the north, he integrated the Italian regions of the Swiss Confederacy after a swift skirmish, while Liguria joined him, birthing the Republic of Italy on March 22, 1798. Its green, white, and red tricolor waved as a symbol of national awakening, though this defiance of French oversight strained ties with the Parisian Directory, who believed them their puppet. Napoleon's ambitions stretched far beyond the peninsula. By summer 1798, he assembled a Franco-Italian fleet to dominate the Mediterranean, targeting Sardinia's key ports while besieging Cagliari, where British naval support bolstered Bourbon resistance. The campaign then pivoted to Egypt, where Napoleon scored victories at Alexandria and the pyramids. Leaving Doucet to govern Egypt, where the general earned the title Just Sultan for his equitable rule, Napoleon returned to Italy by late 1798 to counter threats from Austria and Naples. The War of the Second Coalition erupted in March 1799 as Austrian and Russian forces, led by Suvorov and Melas, stormed northern Italy, while Naples advanced from the south. At the Battle of Milan, Napoleon's army of the Po repelled the invaders, exploiting their fractured command to push them back to Verona, though their sheer numbers prevented a knockout blow. In the south, the corrupt and sluggish Neapolitan army under King Ferdinand IV marched on Bologna, only to be obliterated at Ancona in May 1799 by Napoleon's artillery barrages and cavalry charges. Naples fell in June, its restless populace embracing Napoleon's promises of reform, while his agents sparked a revolt in Sicily, forcing the Bourbons to flee to Malta under British protection. By July 4, 1799, Cagliari succumbed, completing Sardinia's conquest. Yet, victory bred new challenges. Bourbon loyalists, Savoyard diehards, and regional factions, fueled by Italy's deep-sea divisions, launched guerrilla campaigns in Naples and Piedmont, draining Napoleon's resources. A late 1799 Austrian offensive met Italian and French troops at Milan, capitalizing on coalition gains. Undaunted, Napoleon struck back in 1800, bypassing Habsburg forces in Romagna to seize Florence. Capturing Parma's Austrian supply depot, he disrupted their logistics, setting the stage for the decisive Battle of Marengo on June 14, 1800. As Austrians gained the upper hand, Doucet's relief force turned the tide, routing the enemy in a counterattack that liberated Milan and Venice by summer. Seizing the moment, Napoleon declared himself President of Italy in July, consolidating power. In France, Doucet, allied with Napoleon's brother Lucien, staged a coup, claiming the role of First Consul, leaving Napoleon to rule Italy unchallenged. Britain, undeterred, armed rebels in Naples and Sardinia, prompting Napoleon to fortify coastal defenses and expand his navy, eyeing Mediterranean supremacy. With Rome as his capital, Napoleon set about blending revolutionary zeal with the imperial dreams of Caesar and Trajan. He poured his energies into consolidating the Republic, building roads that linked Milan, Florence, Rome, and Naples in a network rivaling Roman engineering, binding Italy's fractious regions. In the Eternal City, he restored the Forum and the Palatine Hill, not as mere relics, but as potent symbols of a reborn Roman spirit. Museums in Florence and Venice showcased Renaissance masterpieces alongside ancient artifacts, igniting a cultural reawakening that rallied Lombards, Venetians, Tuscans, Romans, and Neapolitans to see themselves as heirs to an imperial destiny. Napoleon's gaze soon turned towards the Mediterranean, envisioning it as Mare Nostrum, through the conquest of Tunis and Tripolitania. Yet, the War of the Third Coalition in 1805 forced a pivot, as Austrian defenses fortified the Alps, weary of Napoleon's past triumphs at Rivoli. Unwilling to be bogged down, he deployed Italy's fledgling navy, forged in Genoa and Venice, to ferry 20,000 troops to Ragusa. There, he wooed Croatian leaders with promises of autonomy within an Italian-led federation, exploiting ethnic tensions simmering in the region. At the Battle of Cannin in October 1805, Napoleon shattered Austrian forces, while Italian troops surged across the Tagliamento, seizing Udine. By November, the armies converged on Fiume, marching towards Vienna and Zagreb. In Bohemia, Franco-Italian forces encircled the Austro-Russian army, culminating in the Battle of Brno in December, a crushing victory that rivaled Austerlitz's glory. The Peace of Pressburg ceded Trento, Dalmatia, and Pola to Italy, boxing Austria in, though they clung to Trieste due to France, a move that strained Napoleon's alliance with Doucet. Upon Napoleon's return to Rome, in a grand ceremony at St. Peter's Basilica, he crowned himself Emperor of the Italians. Officially, Napoleon, by the grace of God and the constitutions of the Republic, Emperor of the Italians. He donned the Roman laurel wreath, evoking his forebears Augustus, Trajan, and Constantine. Pope Pius VII was present, yet sidelined by Bonaparte. Doucet was displeased by his imperial ascension and privately began to view Napoleon as a rival, but publicly supported the measure as he further strengthened his own position as consul. Britain sensed Napoleon as a potential wedge to use against Paris for a future war. Undeterred, Napoleon fanned the flames of Balkan liberation, bolstering Slavic and Greek rebels, sowing the seeds for a Roman future. Yet, the Franco-Spanish defeat at Trafalgar in 1805 left Italy's coast exposed to British raids, particularly in Naples and Sardinia, where London-backed rebels exploited local grievances. The War of the Fourth Coalition erupted in October 1806, with Austria and Russia challenging the revolutionary states again. While France stormed Berlin, Napoleon's Italian forces carved a swift path through Carinthia, seizing Vienna in a brilliant campaign. In the spring of 1807, he unleashed his planned offensive against the faltering Ottoman Empire, exploiting its internal unrest. His Grand Army swept through the Balkans, capturing Sarajevo and Belgrade by April with the aid of Serbian and Croatian insurgents, much as Napoleon had rallied locals in Egypt. Durazzo fell too, securing the Adriatic coast, while the Italian navy, despite British harassment, claimed Crete, cementing Italy's Mediterranean foothold. The Ottoman response, bolstered by British artillery, met Napoleon at Thessaloniki in May 1807, but his refined artillery tactics obliterated their lines. The march on Constantinople, however, proved grueling, with Ottoman resistance stiffening near Adrianople, though the city eventually fell amidst ethnic violence as Muslim refugees fled from the vengeful Slavs and Hellenes, who were all too eager to return the treatment to their old masters. Italian troops reached Constantinople and took the city by July, an act he used to bolster his popularity across the Orthodox and Catholic worlds. But Napoleon's decision to hold the Tridentine Catholic Mass in the Hagia Sophia, led by Father Benedetto Fenaja, the Latin Patriarch of Constantinople, rather than an Orthodox divine liturgy, stunned Greeks, Serbs, and Bulgarians, signaling Italy's imperial ambitions. The Treaty of Tilsit ended the War of the Fourth Coalition. Italy annexed Carniola and Croatia from Austria, alongside Herzegovina, Epirus, Crete, Naxos, Rhodes, and eastern Thrace, removing the Turks from Europe, with Constantinople as Italy's eastern jewel. Napoleon reorganized the Balkans into satellite states. Montenegro and Serbia were joined together as the Kingdom of Dalmatia under Jerome Bonaparte. Romania under Louis Bonaparte spanned from Epirus to the Nestos rivers, with Moesia under Jerome Bonaparte covering the remaining European Ottoman lands. Yet, this triumph sowed discord, integrating Croats, Serbs, Greeks, Bulgarians, and Turks into a Roman framework sparked resistance as local identities clashed with Napoleon's vision. Still, his reforms began to form a nascent Roman identity, rooted in Rome's mythical allure that captivated every European heart to some degree. At home, Napoleon's cultural renaissance revived the ancient office of aediles to orchestrate lavish festivals celebrating Italy's heritage, the church, and his reign, evoking the pageantry of Rome's golden age. Land grants in Dalmatia, Crete, and Thrace lured impoverished southern Italian farmers, spreading Italian culture while cementing loyalty, a tactic drawing from his earlier resettlement schemes. These regions, governed by Roman-inspired legal codes, granted Christians greater freedoms than they'd endured under the Ottoman yoke, building an imperial identity. His relationship with the Catholic Church, strained by his conquest of Rome, demanded finesse, and the restoration of the Hagia Sophia to Catholic hands was a masterstroke by the Corsican. In 1808, negotiations with Pope Pius VII guaranteed the Catholic Church's legal status through an extensive concordat. He also agreed to fund restorations and additions to St. Peter's Basilica, a gesture of consolation for his perhaps overzealous zeal in dismantling the Papal States. Famous churches like the Duomo, St. Mark's, St. Peter's, and the Hagia Sophia were given directly to the Church. By appointing Italian bishops to the Balkan dioceses, he wove a Roman Catholic identity, linking Italians with their Eastern subjects, aligning the Church's historic role as Europe's unifier, a vision rooted in their Counter-Reformation spiritual legacy. Despite peace with Europe, the Ottoman War dragged into 1808 as Egypt rebelled and Persia claimed Mesopotamia, fracturing the Ottoman Empire. The war stretched Italian resources, as the Romaic forces, bolstered by Italian troops, clung to the Aegean coast, but failed at further Anatolian conquests, frustrating Napoleon's designs. Ottoman resistance, armed by British gold, pushed his garrisons back to Smyrna. In 1808, France's invasion of Portugal diverted British attention, so he pushed the Ottomans back before making peace. This also opened a window for Napoleon's long-planned North African campaign. In June, an Italian fleet landed 15,000 troops in Tunis, where the Bey, Ibn Ali Benthani, obtaining local rule under Italian suzerainty, a pragmatic arrangement. Marching east, Italian forces seized Tripoli in August, freeing European slaves held by Barbary pirates, in a victory hailed throughout Europe. Yet, control beyond Tripoli faltered, as Cyrenaica's Sufi order resisted, underscoring the limits of imperial reach in the Maghreb's unforgiving deserts. Nonetheless, upon his return, Napoleon decided the time was ripe for an even grander gesture. Once again, at St. Peter's, another coronation took place, 3 years since the previous one, though this time Pope Pius VII crowned Napoleon Bonaparte, and now with a far more prestigious title. Dominus Noster Napoleon Caesar Pius Felix Invictus Augustus Imperator Romanorum Gratia Dei et Constitutionibus Rei Publicae. Our Lord Napoleon Caesar, pious, fortunate, unconquered, Augustus, Emperor of the Romans, by the grace of God and the constitutions of the Republic. This title paid homage to the true Roman titles emperors previously took, not that of the Germanic pretenders. When the news spread across Europe, Francis II, the last Holy Roman Emperor, who abolished the empire 2 years earlier, was beside himself. His family traced itself back to Charlemagne and its fateful coronation on Christmas 800 AD, and now some Corsican nobody swindled the Pope into legitimizing his farcical empire as Rome. The kingdoms of Napoleon's brothers, Dalmatia, Moesia, and Romania, were transformed into provinces of this revived Imperium Romanorum. However, Louis, by far the most popular and successful monarch of his three brothers, was given the title Caesar Ludovicus Pius Felix Nobilissimus Princeps Juventutis Imperator Designatus. He now ruled the eastern half of the empire, under Napoleon of course, as the heir apparent from Athens, the perfect city for Napoleon's designs, by far the most famous Hellenic city with an ancient history, and a small population that would be easily supplanted by new settlers. It was an effective blank slate. Construction soon began on rebuilding the Acropolis into one of the most luxurious palaces in Europe, for their new Caesar. No expense was spared as Athens was destined to reclaim her spot alongside Rome as the two lungs of European civilization. While the Bonapartes were prancing about in the Balkans, the War of the Fifth Coalition in 1809 shattered the Franco-Roman alliance as Austria struck at France. Napoleon, choosing neutrality, secured Austrian recognition of his empire, though importantly not the title, and wed Archduchess Maria Louise, a diplomatic masterstroke that bolstered his legitimacy. The France, bloodied at Aspern and Elsing, but triumphant at Wagram, seethed Rome sidestep. Rome, meanwhile, flourished amidst Europe's chaos, as artisans and scientists, fleeing Germany's renewed turmoil, poured into Florence and Milan. With everyone else distracted, Roman forces captured Annaba, the birthplace of St. Augustine, after a clash with Algerians, expanding their African holdings. Tensions with local Muslims flared as the empire encouraged European settlers, but Napoleon's military acumen proved sufficient to quell revolts. In January 1811, a peace treaty with Britain formalized their détente, as London recognized Napoleon's titles and throne, seeking to pit Rome against France. Outraged, France resolved to crush Napoleon's upstart empire, massing 60,000 troops in Bavaria and Saxony under the guise of targeting Austria and Russia. In July, they stormed the Alps, aiming for Trento, expecting to sweep the Italian plains, where the Grand Army seemed ripe for defeat. Napoleon, ever the strategist, anticipated the gambit, leading 40,000 troops to smash a French corps at Aosta, where General Doucet suffered a bloodbath despite his capture of Trento. Undaunted, the French marched south, their cannons pounding Roman defenses. In September, the armies crashed at Asola, a titanic struggle of 200,000 men that rivaled Leipzig's apocalyptic scale. Napoleon's artillery roared like thunder, while Doucet's cavalry charges carved through Italian lines, as both sides lost 50,000 souls. The French ultimately retreated under the cover of darkness, their resolve shattered by Roman tenacity. In October, Napoleon forced the final showdown at Villafranca, cutting the French retreat with the river. The victory expelled the invaders across the Alps, with Trento's recapture netting 10,000 prisoners. By 1812, France, battered by Rome, Austria, Russia, and British advances in Spain, collapsed. The Bourbons returned, ceding all lands east of the Rhone, as well as Corsica to the Romans, finally fulfilling Napoleon's dream of liberating his homeland, a poignant triumph for the emperor. Amidst these victories, the Ottomans had seized upon the French distraction, pushing Roman garrisons to Constantinople's gates, poised to reverse Napoleon's success. Romaic and Bulgarian forces eventually forced them back by the end of the year when the status quo was returned. However, Napoleon's hands were finally free for a conclusive campaign in 1814 against the Turks, as Britain viewed Russia as their main rival. Blitzing across Anatolia, the Ottomans crumbled at the Battle of Bursa as Napoleon's combined arms overwhelmed the Sultan's janissaries. By December, Italian banners flew over Ankara, forcing Sultan Mahmud II to flee as his empire teetered on collapse. Cyprus was captured with a swift amphibious result. Roman troops then moved into Lebanon, where Maronite Christians hailed them as liberators, their banners fluttering like echoes of their crusading forefathers. City after city fell to the Romans, with the capture of Jerusalem serving as a high point. Satisfied with his victories, Napoleon made peace with the remnants of the Ottomans in the Treaty of Valletta, taking huge chunks of Anatolia and the Levant, which were settled with Armenian and Romaic refugees from Turkish lands. The Qajar dynasty of Persia were none the happier, having maintained positive ties with Rome throughout Napoleon's reign, as his conquest cemented their control for Mesopotamia. In Rome, the victory was hailed with a grand triumph through the new Arco di Trionfo, crowds roaring as Napoleon, with his laurel crown gleaming under the eternal city's sun, had etched his name alongside Rome's immortal conquerors. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure to check out if Napoleon became the US president here. I know you'll like it. If you enjoy my work, please like, subscribe, and consider supporting me on Patreon to get access to the maps and more. Special thanks to Long Rain for helping with the timeline, so if you want to turn your ideas into videos, email your scripts to nostradamus.history@gmail.com. Thanks for sticking around to the end, goodbye.